Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about CSS and HTML. So, our swap for today are to understand the purpose of HTML and CSS. We're going to talk about the box model. We're going to describe the purpose of H1 to H6 tags, the title tag, and the body tag. You may also hear tag as element, they're synonymous. We're also going to learn how to use CSS selectors, what they are, and how we can use them to target HTML elements on our web page and add styling to the web page. So first, let's jump right in and talk about CSS and HTML, what they are and what their purpose is. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the language we use in order to describe the structure of the web page. So if we're thinking about it in terms of this analogy that's being shown in this picture, HTML in relation to the human body is a skeleton. It's what provides the human their structure. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS is the language we use in order to describe the purpose of web pages. So this includes like the color of our web page, the layout, the font, and we can also use it to specify like the different size of everything on our web page in relation to the screen size, or if we're on a mobile phone, like how big should a title be if we're in a mobile phone versus if we're on a 13-inch MacBook Pro. So if we think about CSS in relation to the human body, as shown in this picture, CSS is what adds styling to the human. It's what adds things on top of the skeleton. So it adds the skin, it adds the outfit, the color of the outfit, the eyes, the eye shape, can add hair, or if we have no hair, or in the color or the style of our hair, etc. So CSS and HTML we can do a lot of very powerful things with them. So let me show some examples. So let's look at Lynx Cars. So Lynx Car is a car dealership over in the UK, and this is their website. So as you can see, they have a lot of animations going on. They have a lot of different colors. This animation, they have this nice background here in the web page. So all of these different colors, this coloring of this background, the decision about like how this car is placed on this web page in relation to this car and this car. This was all done in CSS. Let's look at a CodePen of a hot air balloon. So CodePen is just a website where we can write HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, and we can view a preview of it down here. So in this CodePen, somebody created an animation of a hot air balloon flying through the sky using only CSS and HTML, which is pretty impressive. So the animation part, the part where there's movement, was done by CSS. And this is all the CSS it took in order to accomplish this. Also, like the colors that we see, the shape of the clouds, this was also done by CSS. Let's look at an animation of the New York City subway. So this animation was completed using CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. While we see JavaScript here, let me talk about what JavaScript does as well in relations to web page. So JavaScript adds interactivity to our web page. So if we think about JavaScript in terms of the human body, talking about the human body analogy, JavaScript is like the muscles of the human. So they allow the human to like move around, they allow the human to interact with the world. That's what JavaScript does. So the animation here was completed using partly CSS and partly JavaScript. And the shape of all these lines and like all the colors of all this and the font and the spacing between the letters, this was all done using CSS. Let's take a look at an animation of a square. So here we have this animation of a square, and they're using only CSS and Java and HTML here, no JavaScript. So the animation of the square bouncing and then rotating 360, this was done using CSS. And then if we hover over this element down here, and we see the color changes when we're hovering over it or when we're not hovering over it. This was completed doing CSS, using CSS. And then one more, I have a CodePen of the Mexican flag. So this Mexican flag that we see here was created using HTML and CSS as well, no JavaScript. And if you look over here at the HTML, you can see this flag was created using only 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. That's not a lot of not a lot of HTML at all. So let's break this down a little bit. So they have this section element. This is what's used to wrap the flag. They have this div called with the class name of verde. This means green. And we'll talk later about what a class is. But this first div is what's being used for this section of the flag. And then we have another div called blanco, which means white. And this div was used to create this part of the flag. And then we have another div called rojo, which means red. And this div was used in order to provide the structure, the framework for this section of the flag. So then in order to add the color and like the width and the height and the positioning of this box to this box, CSS was used. And then in order to like add this complicated logo, CSS was also used. So as you can see, we can do a lot of interesting and powerful things using HTML and CSS. So now let's jump into talking about HTML a little bit, and then we'll see some examples. So you might have seen like this head tag before, these head elements. So the head tag is information for the browser and search engines about how to render the page. So anything in between the opening head tag and the closing head tag is going to be information for the browser and the search engines about our page. If you see the title tags, the text that goes in between the closing and the opening and the closing title tags is going to be the text that's shown on the browser tab. So where you see here on this tab up here, CSS only Mexican flag, this text was written in between these two tags, and that's how it was rendered here. Then the body tag, whatever's inside of the body tags is going to be the content of the web page. So let's talk about the box model next. I'm going to go to this subreddit all in order to talk about the box model. In order to open the developer tools and to be able to inspect information about this web page, we can, in Chrome, hit Option Command J. And when you hit Option Command J, your developer tools are going to open up. So right now we're in the console, so this is all like the warnings and errors that Reddit is getting. But if we go to Elements, we can see information about the HTML and the CSS on this web page. So again, this is our inspector tool. And if we hover over parts of this page, we can see some information about that specific section of the page or that specific element of the page. So hovering over this search input, we get told input, header, search. So this is a little bit information about like what type of element this is. This is an input element. And then we get header search bar. So this is information about its class and its ID. And then we also get like background, padding. So this is just some information about the styling that was used for this element. But of course, there's more styling than this. Let's inspect something else. Let's inspect this box. So we're going to inspect like a post. Okay. So we clicked on this post using the inspector tool, and now we can see the HTML that was written in order to create this post section. And you can expand or unexpand in order to see other parts that are inside of this whole post. So this is the whole post, and then inside of this post we have like this section up here where there's information about who posted this post and when. Then this next div is the title, looks like the title for this post. Then if we scroll down a little more, this next div looks like it's the image or the video for this post. Then the next div, let's scroll down a little. The next div right here looks like it's information about the comments, the share, the save. And then if you like open this more, expand this part, for example, there's more divs inside of it. And you can hover over them and learn a little bit more about what else is included here. But as you can see, HTML is nested. Let's go to here's their head tags. So this head tags provides information about like how to load this page and how the browser renders it. So here we have some link to, looks like it's going to be for a JavaScript file. So this web page requires JavaScript, and the HTML file has to tell the browser that there's a JavaScript file that's required in order to use this page correctly. So they have another JavaScript file, another one. They have a lot of different files being used for this, but all this is information about what needs to be used in order to render this page. What files does the browser need to make a request and ask for in order to render this page properly? And here we see the title tag. The title tag is also inside of this head tag. And the title tag right here says a subreddit for cute and cuddly pictures. This is what's being shown in this browser tab. Then we get some information about the character set UTF-8, and then some other random information about how to view this page. Oh, and then This page also requires a lot of different CSS files and then some more JavaScript. And then here's some meta information. More metadata. So this metadata is going to help the search engine figure out how to index this web page. And we hit the end of the head tag. That's a lot of information inside of that head tag. But let's inspect again this this post. Let me see. Okay. So here's the HTML, here's some CSS. By the way, you might see it like this sometimes. If you see it like this and you want to view the CSS for this, all you have to do is go to the Styles tab and then pull this up. Okay. I'm going to expand this a little. So all HTML elements can be considered as boxes. So we can think of every HTML element being wrapped in a box that contains a margin, padding, a border, and the content. The content is the text or the image or video. It's what's actually being displayed on the web page. So in our example, so here we can see like a diagram of the box model. So in our example, we were inspecting this section, this post. So the content is shown here in this diagram. So it's this puppy video and it's this text about the puppy video. Then the border is like the line or the border that goes around the content and the padding. So here's the content, here's the padding. The padding is the space between the border and the content, and it's transparent. And then the border is like what goes around both of those. So let me add some color to the border so that we can visualize it. So I'm going to say border style solid border width thick, and I'm going to add a color, border color blue violet. Okay. All right, so here's the contents. It's the image, it's the text that's actually going to be displayed to the page, and then the padding is the space in between the content and the border. So it's kind of small here, but if you see this, the green that shows up here when I hover over here, padding above where it says posted by you/Araragi, etc. There's like a little green slither. That's some padding. There's some padding at the top of the content. And then the purple is the border. The border is what goes around the content and the padding together. And then the margin. There's no margin here, but the margin is the space outside of the border, or you can also think of it as the space between elements, and it's transparent. So both the padding and the margin are transparent. They're like spacing. And then the border and the content is what you're going to see on the page, and then the border can be transparent, or you can add styling to it. in order to be able to see it as we did in this example. So again, the padding and the content are surrounded by the border. So the content, so the padding is like the space between the content and the purple and the border. And then the margin is the spacing between different elements on the web page. So if we added a margin to this, let's try that out actually. If we say margin top, so I want to add a margin to the top of this element. Oops. Let me try again. Margin top. So you see? So without the margin, there is no spacing between this post. And then with the margin, there's spacing here between this post and like the outer section of this post. So here's the margin. To make it even bigger. So now every post is going to have this margin between the top of the outer post, the post container, and the actual post. Okay, I'm going to close this now. And another thing to note, this styling is only temporarily. So if I refresh this page, those changes that I made inside of my developer tools are no longer visible. So those changes that I was making was only for me to play around with. Nobody else in the world can see that I made those changes. So now I want to talk about the header tags. So I want to go to my VS Code. And I have this file called index.html. So this is just an HTML file. So I'm going to say HTML. And I have this extension that gives you the boilerplate in order to create a very basic HTML file. So we have here it says doc type is HTML, so this is an HTML type of file. Here is our head tag, which has some information about how to render this page. Right now, there's nothing inside of the title tag. And then we have this body tag. This body tag right here. And then it also comes with this script tag, which we're not going to need. This is if we wanted to load in some JavaScript. And we have a comment here about if somebody is using Internet Explorer 7, they're gonna they're gonna display on the page, you are using an outdated browser. Please upgrade your browser to improve your experience. So this is commented out right now. To comment out an HTML tag, all you have to do is add the exclamation point dash dash at the beginning of the tag, and at the closing tag, you add the dash dash before the closing caret. All right. So inside the body, this is going to be the content of our page. I am going to write some h1 tags. In each one tag, I'm going to say h2, h3, h4, h5, h6. So h2, h3, h4, h5, h6. Okay. And inside of here, I'm going to write some headers. Hello, this is h1. This is h2. This is h3. This is h4. This is h5. And last but not least, this is h6. Cool. So now let me open up in the browser and we can see how so far this page would look on our browser. So I have an extension that allows me to use a hotkey in order to open up this HTML web page. And the command I was using for that was Option B. Okay, so now we can see the H1 tags and compared to the H6 tags. And so as you can see, the different H1 tags come with their own default styling, right? So the H1 tag is the largest, and then as we progress down the tags, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. But the main purpose of the different headers is actually not for styling. Their purpose is actually for screen readers to be better able to navigate the web page and for search engines to be able to learn about what the web page is about. So one of the best semantic HTML practices is to only have one H1 tag on a web page. So having only one H1 tag on a web page is going to make it easier for screen readers and search engines to know what the web page is about. So although each of these header elements has its own default style including sizing and color, we can overwrite this default styling using CSS. The default styling that comes with these tags is not so important. What's more important here is that we use the H1 to display on the page what's the most important thing about this page, what is the overall topic about this page. The H2 tag would be like the second most important topic on this page, or like a subheader, and this would be like a subheader, and etc. But really the most important tag to be conscious about is the H1 tag. It's best practice to only have one H1 tag per web page. All right, so now let's add some different styling to these elements. So how can we add styling to our HTML? How can we add CSS to our HTML? We have three different options. So our first option is to add styling inline styling. So in order to add inline styling, all we have to do is go inside of the opening tag, and inside of there, write the style attribute equals, and then inside of quotation marks, write whatever style rule you want. So I'm going to say I want to make this H1 tag the color aqua. Okay, so this right here is a CSS rule. This is a statement about CSS. This is the CSS rule. So let's go to our web page, refresh, and now we have this aqua H1 tag. That when we created this color, we added this color, this CSS, using inline styling. Another way that we could add style to this web page is by using an internal styling. So we can use the style tag, and inside of here we could write some CSS. So let's just say I want to make the H1 tag aqua from here instead of from here. So I'm going to delete this. So now I have the style tag, and inside of here I have a CSS rule. So I'm saying I want the H1 tag to be the color aqua. Let's go in here and refresh our page, and it's still aqua. And just to prove that the styling is coming from here, let's try purple instead. Refresh, now it's purple. So this is perfectly fine. But the best practice is to have a separate file and then import that file, that CSS file, into here. So I have a file called style.css, and I'm going to write some CSS in here. So I'm going to say the same thing, H1 color And I want to do, I don't know, I want to do green. Chartreuse, this color. So now I'm saying I want the H1 tag to be the color chartreuse. But right now, if we refresh the page, the rule is not being applied. And the reason why is because we have to import that CSS file into here. So in order to do that, instead of the head tag, we see this link element. And here it says rel equals style sheet. And it doesn't have any href. So in here, we can add a path to the style sheet. So because the style.css is in the same folder as index.html, all I have to do is specify the file name. If style.css was inside of another folder here, and index.html was outside of the folder that CSS was in, then we would have to specify the path from the index.html file to where the CSS file is. So you just provide like the relative path here. And so now when we make a GET request to get our index.html file, the browser is gonna hit this line of code and it's gonna say, oh, okay, you also need this style sheet in order to render this page properly as a developer desired. So it's gonna go and search for this file. And so if we refresh this now, we get this updated H1 tag. We just saw right here how to target elements, how to target tags. So simply by writing the tag name, we can target it and add specific styling to it. Also, I'm going to change this color because that color was really hard to see. There's different ways to add colors too. You can typically just write out the word like blue, purple, white, pink, whatever. But you can also say RGB 00225. So this is like the how much red you want, how much green you have, how much blue you want, and your Visual Studio should give you like this wheel, this color chart where you can, it's a little hard to access sometimes, but you can use it in order to like pick your color from here, which I find really useful. I'm gonna go with blue or purple blue. Save, refresh, bam. All right, let's go ahead and add some more HTML. Okay, so now I'm gonna use this element called header. So the header tag in HTML is what we use in order to define like the header for a document or a section. It contains information that's related to the title and the heading of the related content. So we can use it to put our nav bar in there, or we can use it to like define the header information for a section of a web page. You can use multiple headers inside of a web page. Okay, so inside of here, I am going to say H1, and then I'm gonna say puppies. So my web page is gonna be about puppies. So let's check out how this looks so far. So we just get puppies up here, and as you can see, like the header tag isn't really printing anything out to the screen. It's used more for semantics. And let's also use our developer tools to inspect what's going on so far. So Option Command J, elements. So here we can see here's our header tag, here's the H1 tag that we made with puppies inside, and then all of our other H1 to H6 tags. All right, let's go back. Now I'm also going to add some I'm going to use this nav element, and the nav element is going to like define a set of navigation links. So inside of here, I can use that A tag. You remember the A tag stands for anchor tag, and this is what we use in order to create links. So I'm going to say this goes to Google. Maybe we'll make a navigation link for going to the Reddit all page. And then we'll make a navigation link to go to our cohort repo. So if you remember, in order to provide which link this is going to take us to, we need to say href and then pass in the link. So I'm going to go get the link. Let's see, google.com. I know this seems kind of like extra, but if I just type in google.com here and save, and I refresh, and I try to hit Google here, it's going to say your file was not found. It may have been moved or deleted. So looking at the URL here, you can see that it's trying to look for google.com inside of my file system. Users, Michelle, development, NYC, 22 intro, HTML, CSS, google.com. And of course, it's not going to find it there because I don't have a folder or file called google.com inside of my computer. So we need to provide the full URL, https www.com, google.com. So let's refresh. Oh, no, let's go back, refresh. And if now I hit google.com, now it's going to take me to what we actually want. All right, the next thing we want to add is the Reddit all subreddit page, Reddit all. And I'm going to paste that in here. So href equals, there we go. Let's test it. Wow, it's taking really slow. And then let's also add this link to this repo page for the HTML and CSS. Oh, wrong page. Okay, so href equals, wow, that is a long link. But here's a whole link, cohort repo. So refresh. Now this is a link, cohort repo, and it's going to take us to our repo for CSS and HTML. So now we've got a navigation bar of sorts. So now I notice I have two h1 tags on this web page. And on top of that, both of the h1 tags are blue because of the CSS rule that we applied earlier. Let's say that we only wanted this h1 tag to be blue, and we don't want this h tag to be blue. How can we do that? So in our style sheet right now, we're saying all h1 tags are going to be blue. Let's go to our index page, and a solution we can make for this is, let's find the h1 tag that we want to keep blue. And let's add a class to this. So a class, adding the class attribute to an element, to a tag, is a way of providing some way that we can identify this specific element, this specific tag. So I'm going to give this class, like, I'm going to call this main title. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it main title. And then I'm going to go to my style sheet and I'm going to say, I only want the h1 tag that has the class of main title to be the color blue. So I can target it, the h1 tag, by its class. So I can say dot main title. So in CSS, we need to tell CSS what we're trying to identify the element by. So if we're writing a period here, the dot, then we're telling CSS we want to target an element by its class. And then you tell it the name of the class. So let's go and refresh our page. And now only puppies is blue. The other h1 tag does not have the class main title, so it's not blue. It's still the default color black. Let's go back to our index page. And now the next thing we want to do is I want there to be space in between my header and the h1, h2, h3, h4 tags, etc. So I want there to be some spacing here. So let's figure out how we can do this. The first thing we can do is we can try it out in our developer tools. We go to elements, and then we can find the header and look at the styling that we have on the header. Not much, right? It's just default styling. And we can check out some of the properties it has. So here's the content. It has no padding, it has no border, and it has no margin. So what would happen if we try to add a margin? Let's try it here. So I'm going to say margin. I want to add a margin. And the reason why I want to add margin is because I want to add spacing between this part, between this element, and the rest of these elements. So I want to say margin 5em. Wow. So now we have spacing around this header element, right? So here is the content of this header element. So this is the whole header element right now that's highlighted. So the blue part is the content. There's no padding, and here's the margin. So just by adding this line, we added that much spacing around our header. Cool. And what if we only wanted to add spacing underneath the header? We don't want to add spacing all around. Maybe we just want to add spacing here between the header and the first h1 tag. So instead of just saying margin, we can say margin bottom, and then we can specify some size. Right? So now if we highlight our margin, we can see it's just spacing now between the header and between the h1 element. And so of course, if we refresh this page, the styling is gone. It was only temporary. It was only a sandbox. So let's go back to our style sheet, to our code, and let's add in that rule. So for the header tag, I want to add a border. I want to add a margin. So I'm going to say header margin bottom 5em. And let's go ahead and see how that looks on our web page. Cool. So we added that spacing. So you may be wondering about what this em means. So in CSS, there's several different units for expressing size, like length, width, etc. We have absolute lengths and we have relative lengths in CSS. So absolute units are fixed. It will be expressed exactly that size that's specified. We also have relative lengths, and relative length units, they specify a size, a length that's relative to another property, to the size or length of another property. So relative lengths tend to be better for scaling. So if we're viewing a web page on a phone versus if we're viewing a web page on a laptop, the scaling of our website is going to be different. And there's a bunch of different rules about these lengths. We have EM, we have REM, we have VW, VH. There's PX, there's PT. There's a bunch of different units that we can use. I linked to a reference page about these different units that you could use. inside of the README. So you can go ahead and take a look at that if you want to get more into the specifics of how the different units work. All right, so now our page looks like this. Now let's say we want to change the color of these and we want to change this line underneath the link. We don't want a line underneath the link, and we also want more spacing in between the links. That's what we want to do now. So let's take a look at what we can do. So here in the HTML, we notice that these anchor tags are inside of this nav bar. So we notice that these anchor tags are descendants of nav. These anchor tags are also descendants of the header tag. These anchor tags are nested in nav and header. So we can use this information about these anchor tags in order to target them. So let's say we want to target all the A tags inside of the nav. And in order to demonstrate that the rules that we are going to be applying are only going to apply to these, I'm going to put another anchor tag out here. And I'm going to say, this is an anchor tag to, let's also make it to google.com. To google.com. And I'm going to say another Google link. All right, so let's take a look real quick of how this looks. Okay, so we have that other Google link. All right, so we want to target only the anchor tags inside of the nav bar. So in order to do that, we could say nav A. So here we're saying that we want to target all anchor tags that are inside of a nav tag. And then we can say text, decoration, none. So this line of CSS code is going to remove the underline underneath the link. So let's refresh. So notice now these links don't have the underline, but this other Google link that is not inside of the nav bar, the nav element, still has the link because it's not targeted by the CSS rule that we just wrote. And then we also said that we wanted some spacing between the links, right? So if I click on this and then I open up the HTML and I'm inspecting the anchor tags. Let me click on one of the anchor tags and let me look at their padding and margin and border. So here's the content, here's the padding, no padding because we don't see any highlighting on the page. Here is the border. Again, we can't see the border. The border is invisible unless we state otherwise. And we don't see any highlighting on the page for the margin. So that means that there's no margin. But let's say that we did want to add some, let's go with padding. Let's say we wanted to add some padding and we can say like, I don't know, 2em. So since we only targeted this specific A tag, we provided padding around it. So now, and not the others. So content, padding, border is invisible, margin. Let's also make the border visible for now. Color, actually border, style, solid. Okay, so here's the content, the padding, and then the border, and then no margin. Cool, so let's add some padding to each of these. So how we could do that, we can go to our nav bar here and we can add some padding. And notice right now we're getting like a squiggly line here, and that's because we haven't finished writing a value and a colon. So this is like just giving you a warning that this isn't, we're gonna get an error here. This is gonna work. Okay, and let's add 1em padding, save. Notice how the squiggly goes away. This is now valid. Let's refresh this. And look, now we have some padding in between. We have some padding around each of these tags. So if we inspect each of these, you can see it tells you right there too. Color, this purple color, font, 16 px times padding, 16 pixels. So here's the content again, here's the padding. And as you can see here too, it tells you like from the edge of the content to the edge of the border, it's 16 pixels. And that's all around, 16, 16. So it looks a lot better already. Now for adding the color to these, let's say we wanted each of these to be different colors, right? So let's go to, actually, let's say at first we wanted them to be all like the same color. So let's go into the CSS rule and let's add color. And I don't know, let's say RGB 50, 70. I'm kind of just putting in a random color. So let's say we want all of them to be this color first. Cool, so they're all this like dark blue. And now we decide that we want each of these to be a different color. So let's go to our index page. And let's give it a class. So we're going to say class red. I'm going to say link red. For Google. For Reddit, I'm going to say link green. And for the cohort repo, I'm going to say link purple. So I have 3 classes. Each one of these anchor tags has a different class. So again, if I want to change the first anchor tag to a different color, I can access it by saying dot and then the class name. So I can say dot link red. And then here I can say color red. Then we had link green. Make this green. Then we had link purple. And let's make this purple. Okay. So one thing to notice here is that we kind of have contradicting rules, right? Here we're saying that we want all of the anchor tags that are inside of the nav to be this color, this dark blue color. And the next we're coming in and saying, actually, you know what? We want the element that has the link red class to be red. We want the element that has a link green to be green, and likewise for the purple. So this is where specificity comes in. That's a tongue twister. This is where that comes in. So classes have more specificity than selecting it by its element name. So let's refresh this page. And as you can see, let me close this. As you can see, Google's not red. Reddit, the link to Reddit is now green, and this one's purple. So classes have a higher specificity than targeting an element by its element name. Let's say also now that we want to add an ID to this anchor tag. So if I say ID, and I'm going to say ID yellow, I'm just saying ID here just so that it's clear that this is going to be referring to an ID identifier rather than a class. And also, let's add another class to this link to this tag. So in order to add another class 2 rule to this anchor tag, all I have to do is space and then provide the next class name, class orange. Okay. So I have two classes for this first anchor tag, link red, class orange, and then I have an ID of yellow. So first, let's target this element using its class orange. So I'm going to say dot class orange, and I'm going to say color orange. So now the anchor tag, let me pull this side by side. So now this first anchor tag has a few contradicting rules in our CSS, right? First, CSS is going to apply this color. Then it's going to get to this rule and it's going to say, oh, this first anchor tag has the link red class, so I'm going to apply the color red to it. And then it's going to get down to this class orange class. And it's going to say, okay, this anchor tag has the class orange class. I'm going to make the color orange. So let's check it out. So now it's orange. So the reason why this is working like this is because class orange has the same specificity of link red. They're both, if you see here where it says selector specificity, we can see that link red has a selector specificity of 010. And so does class orange. But what if in link red, now we, instead of just targeting it by the class, now we target it by the ID instead. So we had an ID of ID yellow. So let's add ID yellow. And I mean, let's just make this yellow too. So now see, as the CSS file runs, it's first going to think that this first anchor tag should be blue, and then it's going to think it should be yellow, and then it's going to come to class orange. And the question is, will this Google now turn orange or will it stay yellow? It turns yellow. So the reason why this is because in CSS, targeting an element by its ID has a higher specificity than targeting it by a class. And of course, targeting an element by a class has a higher specificity than calling it just by its element name. I'm going to change this back to red because yellow is really hard to see. And instead of the ID being ID yellow, I'm going to say ID red, only to give the ID name more purpose and meaning. All right, let's just double check that. All right. And I would say we want to change the font about these. You can do several things. So we can come in here and we can say font size, and they give you like a bunch of options you can do. You can also use some of the units. I'll just say larger though. See how that looks. So that's a little larger. You can go with that. And I also want to change the font style. So let's look up some CSS font. Or font styles CSS. And there's a bunch of different websites that give you some fonts that you can use in CSS, or that where you can download some new fonts into your project to use. Let's check out these fonts. Here in W3 Schools, they even give you like a little playground where you can check out how these different fonts look. I like this one. So I want to take the CSS for this. And then if we go back to our page, refresh, now we have this new font here. And now let's say like, we actually want this font to be applied to everything in our page. One way we could do that is by targeting the body, right? Because the body here holds all of the main content of our page. So we can say body, and then instead of putting it here, we just place it here. So now if we refresh our page, everything should be in this font. Now let's say I want to like move this part, this content over to the right a little. So I want some margin in between here and this content. So right now, all my H1, all my header tags and my A tag, these are children of the body tag, but they don't have like a container. So we can make a sort of container for them. So we can say like, you can use a div. You can also use like, there's another element called section. There's another element called article. We also have span. These all are a little different. Some of them are for semantic purposes too. But for here, the div should work just fine. All right, so right now we added the div, and if we refresh the page, it doesn't really change anything about this, right? It looks the same. But now if we open our developer tools, now we have like, I don't know if I can find it, yeah. Now we have like this container. Oh. Now we have this container that holds all of the H1 tags and the A tag. Right, it's this div, this is the container. And if we open up this div, this container, we can see all of the H1s, 2, 3, 6, A. Perfect. So now what we can do is we can target this container and we can add a margin to the container or even a padding. So let's see how this would work. So if we add a margin, let's say we want to add a margin to the left, and let's say auto, or actually, what am I doing? There we go. Let's say 3EM. So we added a margin to the left of the div. So now we have the spacing here. And as you can see, our header is still the same. It didn't move, right? Because we were specifically targeting this container right here. And again, you can look at your box model display here in order to check out the margin that was added. So why don't we do that? So I am going to go, first I'm going to add an ID to this. ID, I want to call this main. And then instead of here, I'm going to target the main ID. So again, in order to target an ID, you have to use the hashtag. So hashtag and then the name of the ID. So the hashtag tells CSS that we're about to target an element with an ID by its ID name. So now we can do margin left and provide some margin spacing. So if we refresh, it's the same because we were testing it already in our developer tools. And I'll say we also want to add maybe like a background color to this main container. So let me open up my developer tools again, inspect my container, and so to this whole container right here, we want to add a background color. So first, let's check it out in our developer tools. So we can say background color. Did I spell it right? No. Background color. And we'll just use one of these ones that they recommend. Blue violet, wow. Okay, I don't recommend this color right here. But let's go ahead and add a background color to this permanently. So we can say background color. And oh, no, that's not helpful. RGB. And let's pick maybe like a light purple. Can I get the wheel to come up? I can't get it to come up. All right, I'm gonna just Google it. I'm gonna say RGB color picker. All right, so simply Googling RGB color picker, we get this nice color chart we can use. We can pick a color from here. Say this is a nice color. So I can just copy this RGB and place it in here. All right, so now let's refresh this. So this is a little nicer than the other color and it's less in your face. And now, like, I don't really like how the text is right up against the edge of this container, right? So how we will solve this is by adding some padding. So we can say padding, and then let's start off with 1 EM. So now we added some padding all around. You can inspect this also in the developer tools. So here's the padding. I want to add a little more padding. I'm gonna say 3. Okay, I like this better. And the next thing is, I don't like how this is so long. I have several options in order to decrease the size of this box. So one option I could do is like specify the width. So I could say 5 EM. I could be very specific about it. But the problem here is that like now the text is kind of wrapping and it doesn't look that nice. I could of course like change the sizing of the fonts, and that could be one way to solve this. This may be useful in some cases. Or I could also do percentage wise. So let's say with 50%. And so now it's only taken up 50% of the width. So that is another option. Let's say now I'm seeing this page and I'm like, okay, I want this container centered. And now I don't really like how it's off to the left and there's all the space in here. I want this centered. So let's go back. There are many different ways you can center things in CSS. One thing we could do here is we can say margin auto. And so now if we refresh, now this is centered. So what happened here was we said margin auto. So it's given us like the default margin, which is equivalent on each side. All right, and the next thing is, let's say now we also want to make this text center. We want to center this text inside of this div. So one way we could do that is by adding this rule, text align center. So now if we come over here and refresh, now it's aligned in the center. Now let's say we want to add a background that's an image to this page. Let's look up some cute pictures of puppies. Puppy images. Let's pick. Okay, so I want a large photo. I want it to have good quality because it's going to go span across my whole page. Okay, so let's see. I want to pick, oh, these are really cute puppies. I want to pick this one. Okay. So you can save the image as and then store it on your local computer, which is probably the best idea to do. So that way, if this page gets taken down, you still have the image of the puppy. But for now, I'm going to copy the image address. So I'm going to paste the image address here to show you that it's just the file of the picture. All right. Now let's go in here and I want to add the picture inside of my body because I want the picture to display behind all of my main content in my page. So we can do background image, URL, and then pass in the URL here with quotes surrounding it. All right, let's see how this looks. Oh, very cute. Wow, that's nice. And then next thing is, let's say like now this container looks kind of like it contrasts too much with this image. And we want to be able to see more of this image behind here. So we can play around with the opacity of this. So if I want to target the opacity of that container, I'm going to go to this main, to this CSS right here. We're targeting the container by its ID of main. So all we have to do is say opacity, and we can pass in a value. When we refresh, now we see it's like more see-through. So you can play around with that. You can, I don't know, make it 95. So it's less see-through. So the higher the value, the less see-through it is. The lower the value, the more see-through it is. So if we do 0.15, it's very not see-through at all. I mean, very, very see-through, my bad. So let's change it back to like, I don't know, let's try 0.55. Oh, I don't like that. I think I really like 0.75. Yeah, okay. That looks nice. So we did a lot here. We created like a type of nav bar with a header. We created this container in the middle of our page that shows some information about our fake website. We made a background for our website. And we also changed the opacity of this. So I think the main things to take away from here is like how we can target elements, CSS selector. So we can target elements by the element name. So like by the tag name. You can target elements by providing a class name to them by simply stating class and then providing the name of the class that you want to give it. And then we can also target a class by an ID. So this is how you specify an ID. And again, an ID is the most specific way that we can target an element. The second most specific way that we can target an element here is by its class. And lastly, the least specific way we can target an element is by its tag name. So if there are contradicting rules, CSS is going to pick the most specific, the rule that is the most specific to the element, it's to the most specific targeted element. So if you have contradicting rules for, again, for the headers, as we saw in the previous example, the most specific rule is an element targeted by its ID. And so that is the rule that is going to be applied to that element. There's so many things you can do with CSS. The next thing I want to show really quick. Oh, let's add something to our browser tab. So right now it says index.html, the name of this file. Let's add something like I love puppies. And if we refresh, notice how this is going to change. Now it says I love puppies. You can even change the logo here if you really wanted to. So if you notice Reddit has this logo, Google has this logo, you can change that too. And that would also, you would also put that information inside of the head tag. Before I end this lecture, I also quickly want to talk about Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a CSS framework. And Bootstrap is basically a bunch of pre-written CSS that we can use and add it to our projects. So Bootstrap has written styling for certain elements, and they also wrote styling for specific class names. So we can use the class names that they've written styling for and apply them to our tags and elements in our HTML, and we can get the styling provided by Bootstrap. First, in order to add it to your project, you could download it using Bundle and a few other steps, but the easiest way to do it is by using a CDN. So in order to use a CDN, which is basically just a reference to the Bootstrap code, CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And when you're using a CDN, all that's really happening is that whenever your page is loaded, the browser also makes a request to the server that holds the documents about Bootstrap, and it uses that in order to load the styling. So instead of the Bootstrap coming directly from your computer, from your server, it's coming from Bootstraps. So here is this link we can copy. This tag we can copy, and if we go to our HTML, you can add that in the head. You can just copy it there. So this is just a link element, and we're saying it's for a style sheet, and we're saying that in order to get the style sheets for Bootstrap, you need to go to this crazy long link. And as you can see, the extension on this link is CSS. So let's go to our webpage and let's refresh what we have so far. And as you can see, there were some changes that were automatically made simply by adding in that reference to the Bootstrap, right? And yeah, so Bootstrap has its own styling, its own style sheet, and it seems as if some of the CSS rules that Bootstrap's trying to apply overrode the rules that we try to apply to our page. So that just means that some of the CSS rules that Bootstrap has written in their CSS has a higher specificity than some of the CSS code that I wrote. And so that's why it's overriding some of the styling that we did. And you can even check here in the inspector tools, like the style that was applied to here. So here you can see all the styling. And if it's crossed out, it means that styling was not applied. So, for example, if we want our font back, so we notice like how the font changed. If we want our font back, we need to go to our body, because this is where we define the font, and we need to increase the specificity when we were trying to target our body. So one way we can try to do that is by adding an ID to the body. You can say ID body. Why not? And then so now we can let's target the element by both the tag and the ID name. So we can say body. So now we're saying we want to target an element with the ID of body, and this element should also be a body tag. So let me actually make this a little more specific. So I'm going to say body ID so that we can differentiate between the tag and between the ID. So body ID. Okay, so now we're saying we want to target an element that has this ID called body ID, and it should be a body element. So let's see if this worked. Yep. Okay. So just by doing that, that was enough. We increased our specificity, the specificity of this rule enough. We increased the specificity of how we were targeting the body, how we were targeting all of the main content enough so that it is now overriding Bootstrap's rules. So now we get our fonts back. Lovely. And let me quickly show you also how to like look up what styling you can get for in Bootstrap. So let's look at the Bootstrap documentation. Let me go to Bootstrap. Introduction, Bootstrap. Let's go to is there anything here? Yeah, you can get some default styling about like the layout of your page. So like where things are positioned next to each other and like how the position it changes based on the size of the screen or based on if more things are added onto the page. There's also some information about the styling that Bootstrap has for header tags, for heading tags, for lists as well. Just more information about how it handles it. Some styling information about alerts, which we won't need for this project. We need JavaScript for that. But let's go look at a button. So let's say we wanted to add a button to our page. We have the documentation shows the examples of the different styling they have for buttons. So you could just scroll through here and take a look at like which buttons speak to you. And let's say like I really like, I don't know, let's say I really like the primary button. You can simply copy in this code right here, this line, if you really like the primary button, and then just change it a little bit so that it applies to what you're trying to do. So instead of primary, I might have like submit or login, right? But really, like what's most important here is a class name. So in Rails, we have a lot of helper methods that write HTML for us, right? So we have a button to helper method, and so we can't like, it's not as easy to just copy this and paste it. Maybe you already have a bunch of buttons too and you just want to add styling to it. What you would do is you would add the class to it, and I'll provide some documentation about how you can add classes to different Rails helper methods, including like the button, the forms, etc. So for my demonstration, I'm just going to add this line of code because I currently don't have any button element inside of my HTML. I'm just going to add it. Now let's go to my page, refresh. Now I have this primary button with that styling that we got from Bootstrap. And of course my font, because my font is still overriding Bootstrap's font. Cool. And let's say we changed our mind. And I don't like the primary button anymore. Now I like the warning button. Warning. So I already have a button in my HTML, right? So what I can do instead is just copy the classes that they have here for warning button, and just add it or replace it to the classes here that's already specified. So that's done. Let's refresh. So it changes. And now let's do one more thing. Last but not least, let's say that we want to center this button. We don't like it being all the way to the left here for some reason. Because I've done this before, I already know that what we have to do is we have to add a div or some sort of container outside of the button. So let's just move the button. Let's just move it inside of the div. And first I'm going to show what this does. Nothing. Now we just simply have a container around the button. And what we have to do is we have to add a class. And this class is coming from Bootstrap. So Bootstrap has code. So Bootstrap has some CSS code that's going to look for an element with the class of text center, which we have here, and it's going to target this element and center it. So let's refresh. Now it's centered. And like one other final thing is this primary button is right on the border of this container, right? There's no spacing in between them, and I don't like that. So there's a few things we could do. We could add a margin. We could add a margin to this div, right? Or we could also add a margin to this container. Our choice. So we can add a margin to the bottom of this container or add a margin to the top of this container. It really depends on like exactly what you're trying to do and what's your plan for the rest of this website. But for now, I'm just going to say let's add a margin to the container for the button. So I'm going to add an ID here, and I'm going to say button top. So I'm going to copy this ID, and I'm going to be able to target this button in my CSS using this ID. And I want to say margin top, and let's do 5 EM. Let's see what that looks like. Cool. And so now I provided this spacing in between the button and this container. So there we have it. We have this beautiful puppies page. I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.